So starting from this foramen magnum, you'll notice there's a ridge that connects from foramen magnum to the external occipital protuberance, and that is going to be the external occipital crest here. So now we can start working on our nuchal lines. So the superior nuchal line, if you start from external occipital protuberance, these will be little ridges that stick out laterally here, just like so. That will be the superior nuchal line. Whereas the inferior are going to come off the external occipital crest here, which we see happening right there. Now we also have the hypoglossal canal, which this arrow is showing us that there is a hole going through the occipital condyles here, which would be the hypoglossal canal. We can't see it very well, but right about here is where that pharyngeal or basio-occipital tubercle is going to be located. Now in this picture, again, we can see those nuchal lines a little bit better here. So we have inferior right here, coming from that external occipital crest. And then we can see the superior nuchal lines coming from the external occipital protuberance. Now, something else I want to highlight here is we are able to see the pharyngeal tubercle much better on this picture. And that's what we can see right here. That is the pharyngeal tubercle, or also called the basio-occipital tubercle. Now, looking at the inside, those are those hypoglossal canals right there. We also see foramen magnum. Now this big bump right here is the internal occipital protuberance. And so this ridge, again, going from foramen magnum to the internal occipital protuberance is going to be the internal occipital crest. We also see the sulci. So just sticking out from each side, these are the transverse sulci. You can see they are a groove that a vein is going to sit in. So right here, this is the transverse sulcus. And if you were to follow that along, when it is articulated with the other bones, it'll actually curve around like so. And that is actually what is going to be the sigmoid sulcus. Now again, in yellow here is our occipital bone. We see our external occipital protuberance and our foramen magnum. We can still see the occipital condyles here. And so that just gives you an orientation of what we were just looking at in a fully put together or fully articulated skull. Working on the temporal bone and its features, we have the squamous portion. So this is the flattened portion of the bone that we saw, that suture surrounding. We're also going to see a zygomatic process of the temporal bone. So this is a projection that goes to the zygomatic bone. Now we also saw a zygomatic process earlier on the frontal bone. So it's really important to make sure you're saying the zygomatic process of the specific bone. So in this case, it will be of the temporal bone. We also have the mandibular fossa, which is going to be just a shallow depression in the bone where the mandible is going to be able to articulate. We have the mastoid portion, which is the portion going to be posterior and also inferior to the flattened or squamous portion. This is also where you're going to find something called the mastoid process, which is our next structure. And if you feel behind your ear, you'll feel a big bump on your skull, and that is actually the mastoid process. So the mastoid process is found on the mastoid portion. Now, in front of the mastoid process, we have the external auditory meatus, or sometimes you'll see it called the external acoustic meatus, and this is just going to be the hole leading to the inner ear. We also have the petrosal portion, or the petrous portion. This is going to be more internal, and it's going to project towards the pharyngeal tubercle, but it actually holds the middle and inner ear structures, so the actual bones and the structures that we'll learn later on. This looks like almost like a mountain ridge on the middle and the inside of the temporal bone. We also have the styloid process, which is a very, sometimes large depending on the skull, but it looks like a little pillar.